So I'm very excited. I'm always excited. I start every conversation like that, but it's genuine. Like I really am very excited with everyone I bring on the show because everyone who's been listening long enough knows that this is like a labor of love. I just genuinely get very excited about bringing women and people that I admire so much on the show and giving you the time and space to share your journey and your wisdom with me and the listeners.
So excited to be here too.
Yes, yes. And, for me, this is extra special because you're like, I don't know, like for many people who know you would consider you a mentor and a friend and an advocate, and you do so much for women, for Latinas, and for the community. And so it's just an honor to get to share this space with you. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So start at the beginning. Just talk us through your journey and to this moment in time where now you've been with Courtney and Angela for 4 years running their company. But obviously that takes a long time to get to that place. So tell us your journey, where you're from, how you fell in love with this industry.
Well, I am definitely one of the rarities that I am from Los Angeles. I grew up in Arcadia in the San Gabriel Valley, about 30 miles from where I work today. Never occurred to me that I would work in the entertainment industry. My father was a horse jockey and immigrant to this country from Mexico. So occasionally I saw celebrities at the racetrack. So I knew Hollywood happened around me, but I did not have my own ambition. I was an oldest child, a little bit quiet, so I loved reading. My grandmother was always upset I wasn't outside playing more and was like, "You're lazy." But what was amazing was that through reading, I think storytelling just really became my passion. And I wanted to go work in the publishing industry. I wanted to go to New York. I wanted to be the people I saw on television stomping around Manhattan. Um, and then I got a scholarship to go to LMU based on leadership. And that my parents convinced me, you're going to go to grad school. You can go back east because that's where I wanted to go. And I was accepted everywhere. But I took the scholarship, a merit-based scholarship, and stayed in Los Angeles and got to keep my little beater car. And that was the real selling point. And I took a film class. And my first film class started with Singing in the Rain and ended with Boys in the Hood and everything marvelous in between. And I said, this is what I want to do. And I finally put 2 and 2 together. Like there were people that weren't just actors and directors working in the movie business. And, somehow I missed that little screenwriting award that happened at the Oscars, or that final, who were the people actually accepting Best Picture.
Yeah.
And was like, I want to be one of those people. And that began my journey at LMU in film school. I studied screenwriting, and my first internship was a development internship with Egg Pictures. It's now defunct, but it was Jodie Foster's company, famed screenwriter of Meg LaFoe was the vice president of the company. And at the end of the internship, I asked if I could get a recommendation to go work at ICM, also now no longer. But they were representing Jodie at the time. And Meg said, "Wait, why do you want to go work in an agency? Do you want to be an agent?" And they said, "No, but this is what everybody was doing. All my fellow interns, at the company, and also people in film school who weren't pursuing directing." And she said, "Well, did you write the coverage on this book?" And I said, "Yes." "And did you write the coverage on this book?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "You don't need to go work in an agency. You learned everything you needed to learn here," because it was a really solid internship. Jodie made sure that we were actually learning and not just picking up ice cream and coffee. We did those things, but we also had a big binder, and we had to read the trades, and we had to write coverage and answer the phones and learn the names of folks. And so I never talked to Meg again, but graciously, she made sure her assistant kept reaching out and setting me up on interviews. And I remember on December 22nd, I'd worked production all summer, freelance, in the production coordinating office because I was really good at admin. So I kept myself out of running around set and was just doing paperwork as an assistant production coordinator. Sean Connery's company hired me to be a second assistant. And so began my development career in the big feature film world. And I thought that's just what happened. You went to film school and then suddenly you're answering calls from the partners at CAA and you're having lunch catered in. and you're among like the A-list of Hollywood, and you would just work your way up in that little realm. And that was not what my career was, but it was really magical to work for. At that point, he was already an icon. And, you know, box office was super important, and what people got paid was super important. And he was definitely in like the top 1%. So I got to see this like bird's eye view of A-list Hollywood. But I also learned so much because we worked with, even though I was the second assistant taking notes, we worked with people like Bill Broyles and Alvin Sargent, you know, rest in peace. And, you know, Peter Sonnenfeld, who had a big movie at the time. Like, we had these amazing writers coming, not Barry, sorry, Peter. And we just had these huge writers coming through the door. And after 5 years of being there and becoming director of development, I realized outside of Amy Pascal, who only came to our office once, no woman ever came through the door that was a writer, a director, or, you know, somebody that we're actually trying to sell a project to. So even though I saw lots of women in the industry, they were in development, they were running pods, you know, even a few were running studios. But largely, you know, is when I kind of picked my head up and was like, oh, whoa, I've been in this very male-driven, patriarchal, A-list world of Hollywood. And I didn't know if that's where my heart was. And that's really kind of what started my next part of my journey.
Okay. So 5 years then to go from assistant to DOD. Is that a fairly quick timeline, would you say?
Oh, yeah. I was 22 when I got hired, and I had an expense account of $500, and my desk cost more than my car by the time I was 24 years old. I was a creative executive. I thought I was super cool, even though I'd have to park my car around the block at the valet because that was important in those days, what you drove. But
Is it not anymore? I feel like
less so. Like the hybrid kind of changed it a bit when the hybrid and the electric cars came in, but it certainly was not the time to be driving like a Toyota Corolla with like dings on it. But I still thought like, wow, this is so cool. And I remember when they brought my desk in because you know, that during that time, if you had a studio deal, you got an interior decorator. The desk was $13,000. It was like double the price of my car. So,
why does anyone need a desk that expensive?
I mean, because we had a very fancy decorator,
Yeah.
because we could.
Yeah.
And because my boss, who was actually running the company, Rhonda, you know, I think there was a lesson to be learned in that I probably didn't learn for many more years, but that perception is everything, and it wasn't what you needed, but it's what you could set an expectation so that when other times you weren't going to be given what you needed, like the expectation had been set. But like, this is who I am. Like, it's not just about the perception of having the thing. It's about really leading people to like, this is my power. This is who I work for. This is how I run this company. And you know, whether that was her intention or not, that became the lesson for me. You know,
it's like, we need the buy-in
yeah,
of the audience.
exactly.
That this is the role that you're playing here for you to truly have power or perception of power, which is obviously very important here. Like this idea of smoke and mirrors of Hollywood, like when I started to really realize that keeping your head down and just doing the work isn't really enough. It's not, that's not everybody does that. Most people don't. They just have figured this out, or they were born into this industry in a different way, or didn't come from an underprivileged. Like we talk about this being you're a child of immigrants. I'm an immigrant. And so like this idea of, no, you just work really hard and it doesn't matter what you wear, what you drive, how things are perceived, as long as the work is there. And that is true, I think, to an extent, but unfortunately doesn't seem to account for a huge percentage of the whole, you know? I certainly have had that realization more recently, and we've talked about off mic about this and how important that is. So when you figured that out for yourself, what were the sort of changes that you started to make perhaps in your lifestyle or how you showed up in the world to denote, again, to the world that is seeing that one dimension of who you were and who you were grooming yourself rather to become?
I mean, when you know better, doesn't always mean you do better. So it took me a lot longer than that. But I think, for me, it was one, I made a choice to step away from that. And I thought, because of my work ethic, because of the fact that I thought talent would overshadow all these other pieces that I think are really key to be successful in this business, which is, your hustle and your who you know and how you play the game. I was like, oh, I have work ethic and talent. So when Sean decided not to continue the company, I got this wild idea, having just worked on Finding Forrester and been around all of Gus Van Sant's camp. And it was the time of the independent films coming out of the 90s and into the early aughts, that I would start my own production company. So and very quickly I learned, like, when you're not inside of that A-list, doesn't mean you're that cool anymore. Like, nobody's necessarily calling you back or inviting you to this party or that party, and you don't just promote yourself. But I value that those 5 years that I was an independent producer, and I was writing during that time to support my independent producing career, which is really upside down. But I was in survival mode. I was just like, I know I'm talented. I know I can make this work. I'm going to, be Stacey Sher or any other, producer at the time that was making really cool movies that were succeeding at the box office and also had that independent spirit. So I didn't learn the lesson quick enough. I think for me, I still thought, like, if I just kept doing the work and I had talent and I just kept learning more and more, it would pay off. And what is the payoff? Like, I got 2 movies made, 2 small movies. Both had distribution. I don't know that they had a ton of people who saw them outside of the festival circuit. I myself learned so much in that process, and I didn't want to ever be like a physical producer or a line producer. I learned that really quick, even when I was an assistant production coordinator. I think we all have skill sets and talent, and I feel like my talent really lied in relationship building, and again, going back to being like really good with story and having good story instincts. I could see myself moving much quicker through the development side of the business. And to be quite honest, I didn't want to be on set, the first person on set. My vision for me was the person who sits next to the director in the director's chair. And to this day, when people outside of Hollywood ask me what I do, I say to them, like, I do everything on the front end, everything that happens before production. By the time production happens, it's my job to put out major fires or to consult on putting out fires, but I get to sit in the director's chair. And I don't know, chalk it up to not being an early morning person. I'm not sure, because I am good at multitasking. I was a great assistant, but I did not.
When you had worked as an APOC, so you kind of got like a little bit of that.
But I was like, this production thing and this below the line thing, and it just didn't see. And also, I think there was a little bit of fear from my parents that if I worked in an office, especially my mom was a single mom, my dad was an immigrant, like they'd sent me to college. And I think there was subconsciously the idea that an office job was more professional. And so I also feel like that was one of the reasons, like being on a studio lot, working in an office, that was also something that was definitely seeping in there about why that was the place I wanted to be in.
I feel like there is this. I've always joked to someone who did come up in on the trenches in the sort of ground of making things, that it's like the blue collar, white collar Hollywood, and really like the below the line, though I hate that division of above and below. But the people that are making the thing, they are your blue collar workers a lot of the times. And then the white collar people get to show up in a fancy blazer with the nice shoes, with their Starbucks and their coffee, and sit at monitor next to the director, and all of us production people that have been up since 4 a.m, smell weird, and are wearing like Athleta. You don't care what we drive because we can't even try to look a certain way to present that image, at least not while you're making the thing, because you're in your work uniform, But yeah, there is this duality and this discrepancy. And then when I got to have the experience of becoming an executive for the years that I did, I got to be a part of what I say white collar Hollywood. And I was like, oh, this is very nice. You get to go to lunch and you have an expense account, and it is just a very different muscle. It's not that one is easier than the other. I think they both have their different kinds of hard, different parts of the game that you have to play. The sort of like consistency of working those crew hours are really hard, of course, and then traveling because a lot of things don't shoot in LA anymore if you're lucky enough to go with a show. But then the challenge of being here and being a person who is, again, responsible to what you're saying. If you're not running in those circles, your influence, your power, who returns your calls to make deals starts to wane as well, and that has it's a different kind of hard. So me getting to have that experience was like really and really formative, actually, because I've always felt like I had a very different perspective of Hollywood, I guess, and how our industry functions. And through that experience, and then getting to join Latina Squad, which is where we met, which is Christine Davila's like beautiful brainchild. It was interesting because I felt embraced by development execs and the kinds of women predominantly that I always had looked at from afar and didn't really understand, like, what do you do all day? You know what I mean? It's particularly when, and let's be honest, like, there's a huge movement around producers and producer credits being given away to anybody who wants it, it feels like, as a bargaining tool. And so sometimes I know a lot of producers, depending on what you've done on a project, can feel frustration that certain executives can get a credit on a project, and there's a lot they can be said and unpacked about that. But for me, I guess, getting to be a part of this group and almost feeling like imposter syndrome, because it's like, well, I didn't come up as a D girl. I didn't come up in these ways, right? Like I'm sort of like the black sheep in this room. I felt like an outsider a lot, but like people like you and others, and no one was like, pushing me afar, but embraced me. And I share this very long-winded story because that thing that I felt was what made me a black sheep in a way has become my superpower, because now I get to have conversations with women and my peers who've come up more on the development side and help them be better, stronger, more empowered when it comes to the knowledge I have and the production knowledge that I have, and we help each other, because then you can give me these tips and we can sort of like work together to be stronger and better together. And so I don't know, that's just like me sharing that with you,
And
because it's big, it's huge,
Yeah, I genuinely have a respect for whatever you want to call it, above and below the line. But because of those 5 years as an independent producer and making those 2 movies, like, I did everything. I did everything from, probably very badly, but like writing the decks, and we didn't even call them decks then, but the things that would like get the independent money, and doing the budget, and like literally being on Movie Magic and creating the budget and not really knowing what I was doing, like copying other budgets, lived by Christine Vachon's book, whether it was like actually helping me or not. It felt like it was a huge tool. And I remember Alyssa Milano saying to me on the, we were shooting at the LA River, and I was literally picking up trash after lunch. And she was like, wow, you do everything, in a very respectful way. And, for a moment I was like embarrassed because I'd come from this other world, and I was like, I'm a producer picking up trash. But it really taught me that lesson, right? That it truly is a collaborative art. It is not something that can be done singular. And that is, I think, the joy and the beauty of filmmaking and production and television. And, obviously the world has pivoted, and now you can be a short filmmaker in your bedroom with your phone. But when we're talking about what is the traditional business of Hollywood, it is collaborative, and you need everybody from that agent who makes that first call, all the way down to that PA that basically is helping folks at the premiere, and everyone in between. And so I'm glad you felt embraced in the Latina Squad. But those 5 years really taught me about, it's not about having the $13,000 desk and the expense account. It's really about understanding the macro, that this is going to be really, really hard, and it's going to take all of these pieces and bring out your sharpest knives and your best tools, if you really want to be in a position as a producer, to your point.
And I think it's like both can coexist. Like I'd like to think and aspire to be the person who can have the $13,000 desk and will also be able to roll up my Chanel sleeves and pick up trash if I need to. You know what I mean? Like we should be able to coexist. And I think, like, when you really distill capital P producing, what a producer is, what it was. When you go back to the beginning of when this role sort of became delineated, it really was someone who, by all means necessary would make their thing come to life. Like, I watched The Offer recently, and that was the best depiction of a producer, and certainly was a time and a place in our industry. And no one's saying go, get in bed with the mafia, but like in a way we all kind of are.
I mean,
yeah, we won't go there.
XYZ agency was the mafia when I came to the business.
XYZ, indeed. So, but like just really understanding like the magnitude of how you have to be willing to do anything and everything to get your project made, not from a lack of integrity sort of lens, but really like that's why it's so hard to define what a producer does, because you have to do so many things that are often invisible and unseen unless shit's going wrong. Then people are all aware of what didn't get done or what, what balls are being dropped. It's tremendous responsibility. And I think regardless of whether you've come at it from a physical lens and been on the ground doing that work, the financial responsibility you have to investors, to studios, to run that set, run that budget, or the development side, and again, the responsibility you have to talent and to the relationships that you've built, and to say to someone, I've got you, and then actually be able to got them and got their back, I think that's both of those things are equally important. And I long to live in a world, like my dream is like that we can all coexist and have a little more understanding and compassion for both of these lanes. Anyway, enough about me. Back to you. Okay, so then you had this experience for 5 years where were these films that you had also written?
No. I studied screenwriting in undergrad, and I was not planning to be a writer. Once I did the Jodie Foster internship, I was like, creative producing, this is what I want to do. Like, be around the scripts, but also, again, do the hobnobbing and the networking, and be a facilitator of the arts. This is really how I was defining being a producer, as a very young, aspirational executive, and hoping to climb my way up to that producer credit. I was working on a project with a writer to this day. She is one of my very dearest friends, Pamela Buchanani, now Pamela Hawthorne. But she wrote a script called Sluts. It was amazing. We almost got it made multiple times. It was her calling card as a writer. And so I pitched her an idea I wanted her to write that was called Deep in the Heart of Texas. And she was like, honey, I can't write this. One, I'm not Latinx, and we said Latina then, Latina. And she was like, and I'm not bicultural like you, and this is your story, this is really your story. And I was like, first of all, I don't have any time to write this, and panic, but I think also panic of like, I've just defined myself as this is what I want to do, and I didn't think I could define myself also as a writer. But we were really good friends, and, a couple like cosmopolitans in, or whatever the drink of choice was then, apple martinis, and some more persuasion from her. We started writing the pitch together for Deep in the Heart of Texas. And the really quick logline is a bicultural Latina, so much like myself, who is born, and we made her from Orange County, not from Los Angeles, who is not bilingual, is working in advertising, and she gets her big promotion only to find out that it's going to, quote unquote, deport her to San Antonio, Texas to run the new Latin division. And that's the only opportunity she has to reach this level. And then it becomes a very cute rom-com, where she goes and she runs this agency in Texas. And the man running the agency happens to be a white guy who grew up in Texas and knows everything about Latino culture. And so they fall in love, and it's flipping the stereotypes on its head. Sold that to Disney with Nina Jacobson in the room and Eva Longoria. It was going to be her first starring role. Blah, blah, blah. Hollywood happens. Nina gets fired. Never got made, but got me into the WGA. And then Pam and I started pitching on assignments. And between Sluts and Deep in the Heart of Texas, like, there was a really strong female-driven voice in there that also had a cultural relevance. And so was working as a writer, was represented, but still was so defining myself as wanting to be a creative producer. So I was using the money from my writing, one, to get a better car, and two, to really support myself, because I wasn't making money producing these independent movies. I was paying to produce them. I was paying to go to the festivals. Like there was no money left after the festival. I was paying for the festival applications. And then after all of that insanity, because it was, I was young enough to live through the insanity, but having this dual life, trying to balance like who knew me as a writer, who knew me as a producer, how I didn't confuse things, which is probably unnecessary and more about me and my own identity, but it felt like very important at the time, this perception. The writer's strike of 2007 was coming, and I had an opportunity to interview with George Lopez and his then wife and partner, Ann Lopez. And so I thought, I'll just take a development job again just to get me through like the strike. And I ended up being with them for 5 years. And George and Ann hired me before I even got to the freeway. I left Warner Brothers, and before I got to the 134, I got a phone call from their lawyer saying they'd like to offer you the role. And it would, it wasn't like astronomical amounts of money, but it was 6 figures and more money than I had ever made. And I remember Ann said, "I'm sorry, this is all we have." And I was like, "This is more than I've ever had. Thank you very much. I am now going to be the SVP of George Lopez Presents." And I did that job for 5 years.
So then you jumped from that to a bunch of other companies. So you kind of stayed as a development exec and started this path, I guess, of running companies for a lot of like talent-led companies. Walk me through how that has evolved for you. And now that you are, you've been doing this version of your career for what, 15 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think sometimes people ask me, like, why always talent-driven companies, especially because there's a stigma. Sometimes I've worked for actors specifically, not writers or directors, that they're vanity deals. I mean, even when I worked with Sean, one of the reasons why I think my boss had that perception to be like, we will have this office and this desk, is to break that perception of it's a vanity deal. Like she was a real producer getting things made and was going to compete against everyone else on the lot. But I think for me, I came to understand what it was is I'm running a small business and generally inside of a major big corporation, right? Wherever your overhead deal's coming from, whether it's a first look or an exclusive. And that really kind of brings me to my roots of having a very entrepreneurial family. My father, his career ended because of an accident. And so he was no longer a jockey, and he had to like reinvent himself. And he always had 2 jobs pretty much for the rest of my life. So being able to watch that, including, his in the very, before he retired, like he had a small tack business. So he figured out how to like make a small business inside of the racetrack. And my mom was a single mom, divorced at 19 with 2 kids, and really worked her way up in business. And her parents, who were very much involved in my life, both ran small businesses their whole life in construction. So I was around all of that in my childhood, and I think through osmosis, I really came to understand like how to run small teams, how to run small businesses, and I've applied that to running pods, and I think that's why I've been successful. It's not about running around with the talent and trying to get their vanity projects made. It's about really setting the expectations from the very beginning with them of like, what do you want to do? What do you want your brand to be as a producer? And then how do we build towards that? And really manage it inside of whatever ecosystem we are, and understand on the other side of it how I can translate for them all the time what these mandates are, what these needs are at the studio or or the streamer or wherever we may be. And I think that once I learned that and really saw how my business acumen could really meet my creative, talents of storytelling and relationship building, because I do think relationship building is also creative, is kind of how I finally figured out how to crack the code of running pods. And I always set expectations. Like if we can run out there and make something right away, that's fantastic. But we have to be respectful to your point of like, not everyone gets producer credits. Like we have to do this, not that we don't jump through, certain hoops, or not that we don't jump certain steps, but like we need to do this properly. Like we need to run this like a business. This isn't just about like, hey, I work for, Mr. So-and-so and like, what can you give me? And I think, at least for me, that is what has made me more successful at running pods. And, I often get the compliment of like, wow, you guys really do the work, meaning myself and our team. And even sometimes the principals of the company, because they're invested too in wanting to get it done. They just want to be told what they need to do. And once we get over, like, we really do the work, then it's like, okay, like, now we're players, we're here, we like shed that vanity, deal perception, and now we can just kind of cut to the chase and like, how do we get, movies or television or whatever the mandate is made.
Well, you were saying that you cracked the code. What is the crack?
I think it's really kind of showing up and being like, hey, let me listen to you. Be a good listener. Find out from your deal or your studio, whoever it may be, or just the town, the agent, like, what is it that we're trying to do here? Don't come in and be like, this is what we're going to do. Like, listen, and then be able to really come back with a business plan of how you're going to succeed and do that, as opposed to, all right, got it. So this is our one kind of like target that we're trying to hit. Let's find an action movie, or let's do this passion project, or I know this isn't a good project, but let me peddle it anyways because that's how I'm going to keep my job because my boss wanted to do it for 10 years. It's not being a yes man by any means. There's times when I come in a company and I evaluate things that have been, sitting around or lingering or brewing. And I have to say, like, I don't think this is viable. I don't think this is commercially viable. I don't think we can make this till we make something else, whatever it may be. That I think is important, is that you still have to come in as a professional who understands all sides of the business and not be a yes person to anybody on the team, and yet still keep your job in that honeymoon period. And so for me, that's a little bit of the code, is like just setting the expectations and continuing to have, here are the goals, and then revisiting them, and being really communicative with everybody on the team, whether it's the folks at the deal, or it's the agents and managers and lawyers, or it's the actual principals of the company. I think the way to be most effective for me, is to be honest, to always have a point of view, and to be a really good listener, and to be able to pivot when things aren't working.
Yeah. I mean, in this moment we're living in, right? Back-to-back strikes, the market contraction. I mean, the last 4 or 5 years have been as volatile as I think they get in our industry. And I know you've lived through a lot of these cycles, and we've talked off mic about like surviving multiple strikes and things that you've gone through. But I'm curious, like, with all the contraction that is happening and a lot of deals being cut, especially for Black and brown companies and artists and just voices, period. What is the differentiator, you think, for the few companies that have been able to like hold on and are still here?
Well, I think part of it is, if you've hit a certain level, you're going to be able to weather everything. And so I'll use my bosses as an example. You know, they're in the kind of a place where like they're a little bit above it, right? Like the minute the strike ended, they're both right back to work. So, and I think there's a lot of folks, whether it's producers, writers, directors, that are like that. For everybody, and I'm just benefiting from that. I'm riding the coattails of that in this particular position I'm in. But I think for everyone else, like, yes, we always say do the work, but what does that mean? Like, what does do the work mean? And I think I always go back to, like, you have to remember, like, we are in the business of entertainment. So yes, there's trends, and then there's like the argument of like trends versus your instincts, knowing what's good. Nobody knows what they want until they get it. You have to balance all of that. You have to figure out what is in the middle of all of that. Like how, and also not get, be able to survive financially. I mean, that's the bottom line. Like, can you survive financially, whether you're an assistant or whether you're a producer who's been doing this for 30 years? Because as we all know, producers get paid very last, especially in creative producing. If you're making a movie, you get some money on the day of principal photography. The world of development fees are largely gone, like very few people. So unless you have that overhead deal, and then when overhead deals are going away, how will you survive? And so it's a constant balancing act of like, trust your instincts. You know it's good. You've maybe, been successful before, so you just have to do it again. But on the other side of it, you have to read the tea leaves. Like, what are they saying? They don't want to make, movie, whatever it is. Like, movies have to be, sub 30, or it has to be this genre. And you have to put all of that together and kind of create a recipe for yourself and a step process for yourself of like how you're going to get there. And when I say get there, I mean green lights, because that's ultimately when you're going to get paid.
Absolutely. So given that, tell me a little bit about how you go about creating your own development slate, looking at the mandates, creating that recipe for yourself. How have you done that? And then, when projects come across that you don't fit that mandate, but there's something in it, maybe not for this time in the market, how do you fight for that, to your point, without like putting your job on the line?
When you're starting a pod, which I've done several times over again now, you come up with like kind of your brand or your mission statement or your mandate inside the pod. But you have to know that that's just a way to start communicating to people generally what you're looking for, but to be flexible and to pivot, because I like to tell my team, and we talk about in our company, first and foremost, we're in the business of entertainment and we want to be excellent. And the excellence for us, we can speak to because our bosses have been excellent for, decade after decade. So it feels like very much inherent to our brand. But that's really, always where I start. Like, I'm looking for, it doesn't mean that you're not a brand new writer or you're not a seasoned writer, but like when I read something, I want it to be excellent and I want to be moved. And if it doesn't fit in our quote unquote mandate, it's like, okay, well, that's only one story they have. How can we like still play the mid to long term game with this person to get to work with them, because I'm invested in them, whatever it is, their voice, their talent, their, words on the page. And so how I really, to answer the question is like, I start with writers. That's where I start. And that's really how I look for projects. Like I studied screenwriting. I still think like the beginning of building a company for me is I start with doing as many general meetings with writers. And then the second part of your question about, when you see a project that you're like, this doesn't fit the mandate, but I love it. I think there are times I've let things go because I'm like, we don't make sense. And we're not going to be able to tell a good enough story about why we're the producers. And that story might have to start with the agent, where it's like, okay, I set you up on a general with that person, but no, you're not going to make their $300 million, whatever it is, IP-based movie. And sometimes you don't get to do it. But I think when there are things that feel very doable and very much like this is in the lens of what we said we wanted to set out to do, if we just kind of like pivot a bit, it's really about me as a storyteller then. How do I tell the story around why this project is for Bassett Vance or George Lopez Presents or Sean Connery, Fountainbridge Films? It's when my storytelling has to come online, and I have to tell the story of our way into the project, usually beginning with the representation all the way to, why are you guys making a multicam? That doesn't make any sense. Angela and Courtney have never made a multicam. But I can build that story because I personally always respond to stories that at the heart of it, everyone says, oh, universal. But I think like really celebrate like identity and the underdog. And so those are generally the projects that I'm like, oh, if that DNA is in there, I can tell the story for any place that I work, because I'm gravitating towards places that also tell those stories already.
Right, right. And, development obviously takes a long time. Why do you think it is that it takes years? Does it have to take years? I know the tempo of the industry is slow. And again, as someone who came up in production, that was the thing when I went in-house as an executive. I was like, we do this, what now? It takes me 2 weeks just to get on a phone call with you? Like, it felt very inefficient. But again, coming in from a very different lens and then understanding the tempo and having respect for this other side of how the industry functions, I'm just curious, like, why does it have to take so long? Is that always important? Or could that be destructive somehow to a creative process,
Yes and no, and yes and no.
Great.
I mean, both are true. It shouldn't have to take so long, and sometimes it's because, new regimes come in or business affairs takes forever. I mean, my joke is I spend more of my time chasing business affairs than I do anything else in my job on both sides. Like, hi, oh, just wondering, oh, it's on our court. Okay, let me call and tell this person it's in their court. Um, but, and that process can be like exhausting, especially since like I'd say 2017, 18, I've seen this like trickle effect of business affairs taking so long. So sometimes to close a deal is 9 months. You're already like almost a year into from when you hear a pitch to when you even get to sit with the writer or the creator. On the other side of it, I do think you get better work. I mean, writing is rewriting, and sometimes it is necessary to have all of these drafts. Uh, we've shed kind of bringing on other writers because of the contraction in the business. But there was a time when it was like you sometimes needed 3 writers to get the story whole, to get to a green light with features. And that is part of the creative process. People write books for years and years and years, and they have editors before it ever goes, out to you in your hard copy or your paperback or whatever it may be. I mean, writing is rewriting, and I think storytelling is a complicated math problem, and you're always trying to figure out, like, is this the right equation? Is this working out? Is this the answer? So that's why I say both are true. Like, sometimes the creative process really needs that, and other times it is all of the shenanigans of the business from, this president got replaced and this business affairs person, somehow lost their homework for 3 months and whatever it may be. And you just have to, or, and you also sometimes just lose projects in the midst of it because of personal reasons. People, there's all these complicated kind of stories around why things do or don't move forward. But I do think some of the creative process is necessary. That's why I think Pixar, makes movies that make the, zillions of dollars that they do, because they work story for 3 and 4 and 5 years at a time.
Yeah, and I also think that the volume at which people at your level or anyone who comes up on the development side has to hold information on their brain at any given time is truly impressive, because to your point, like it is a math problem, but you have to know like what equation you're even solving for, right? Is almost, I think, the way to look at it. And so to have you even to know, okay, who would be, this is missing this ingredient. It is saffron, and I got to go find saffron, right? To know that that's what you need to make the dish work, I think requires so much of that, the volume. I mean, we were just talking about, like, I'm so impressed and overwhelmed for development executives on how much they have to read and know about, and it's never ending. It's never ending, it just the volume, and especially nowadays. And then there's just the reading, and then there's the watching, and like whether it's your projects or client projects or not client projects, but like people that you're looking to collaborate with, it's just truly like overwhelming. How do you hold all these things in a balance, right? And still find time and space for yourself and your life?
I mean, I don't believe in balance anymore. I mean, I don't. I think like it's a story of in a goal that I've been telling myself probably since I was like in high school,
Yeah.
because I had to do every single activity and every single extracurricular and be in every yearbook picture. So I don't really believe in balance. I think there are times when you have to step away, whether it's because you just need more personal time, you need to nourish yourself, whether it's a vacation or just more time with your family. It's always going up and down. Sometimes it's, if you're in production, like, no way, like, this is it. There is no balance. You're just going to be living and breathing this movie or this series during this time. And people around you who love you come to understand that, or they don't. I mean, it's a very demanding business. But I do think, in order to be productive, there has to be some kind of like, gauge on self-care. And so figuring out what those small things are you can do. So, for me, it's like, I am not I've already mentioned the morning thing. I'm not an early office person. Like, traffic is horrible. It would be a waste of my time to try and get in. And so I take a little bit more time in the morning, whether it's like walking my dogs and drinking my coffee, and I'm still thinking about work. I'm still sometimes working those story problems, but I don't kill myself to be at the office or take a meeting unless it's absolutely necessary, which has been my life for the past 6 months, like before 10
Yeah.
a.m. Um, And then because that's the way it's been for the last 6 months, I literally will do nothing over the holidays. Any movie I see, of course, in the back of my head, my brain is working, it's work, but it will be more out of like my own pleasure and my
Yeah.
own joy. So, I just think like trying to achieve balance, if you know, call me, let me know how that works,
Great.
particularly as a woman in this business and as somebody who I don't see myself that way, but others see as a person of color. And I mean that very respectfully. It's like I go to work every day and I'm like, I'm part of Hollywood, but I do have to work sometimes harder because my last name is Ramirez. That's just the reality. So I don't think I even have the luxury to ever have balance as a woman and as somebody who, people identify as Latinx in this business.
Yeah. Just take a moment for that. That's real. I mean, and I think it's that, we love what we do. And so I always say it's a lifestyle industry because it is all around you. If you live in LA, especially or in a market like ours, like you can't escape it. Even if you're trying to go walk your dog or go hiking, someone's talking about something that it's like you just literally it's everywhere. And that can be suffocating at times or also very inspiring at times. It just depends on where you're at emotionally. I always say the best advice is leave LA every once in a while because life happens outside of our bubble. I do think we live in a bubble. You kind of have to do the work at the level that we do. But I think it's important to separate. And to your point, I don't think what I've learned is that the balance, I always thought it was going to be this like beautiful, perfectly split thing. And it's more of like daily, today it's like 17.3% over here and whatever the other percentage is over there. And it isn't like 50-50 and it isn't in the macro, it's actually in the micro of the daily. How do I find the balance? Like today, obviously my whole day is consumed by this podcast and I love getting to do it, but that's time I'm not with my son. That's time I'm not going to yoga and doing other things that are important to me, right? You have to just be okay with holding all of that in a balance and kind of doing your best every day, as cheesy as that sounds. I think that's the secret, if there is one. Obviously, you are president of Bassett Vance Productions, and you have a few biopics like How Stella Got Her Groove Back. Like, how do you honor this in this world that we're in of like reboots and revamp everything? How do you honor original material while also finding an in to modern day audiences?
Almost our entire slate is IP and not all biopics, but and it wasn't because the market was demanding IP. It's just, I think because and so many of us inside the company, even Courtney, like we're great lovers of books and we read books and then we're like, oh, this could be a movie or it could be visually told. And so that's a question we ask all the time. I mean, the trite is like answer the why now, like why tell this story now? But it is where we start. Like, why is this still relevant? Like, why are we going to tell this story now? And then work backwards from there. We have a project I'll just speak about briefly called Marian Anderson that is about an opera singer who was the first Black performer to ever perform for an American president, was world renowned, an incredible story. One of the things we did when we were researching her life was we saw that as a woman, when she came back to the States, she got married. She didn't get married till she was in her 50s. And then she had an opportunity. She said she was going to retire and she had an opportunity to go sing at the Met. And it became a struggle for her between her husband, who had waited all these years. He'd married someone else, and then, they ended up kind of reuniting and older, and he said he'd been in love with her that whole time. And she chose to go back to the Met, which would mean leaving where they were in Pennsylvania and going back to New York because it was a lifelong dream to sing there. And so we decided to focus the film around that, and when we're in development, around the choices that women have to make, because it still felt very relevant. So we could have told her story from cradle to the grave, and I know it's a trend to also not tell cradle to the grave stories, but that period of her life really came out of us looking at the whole thing and being like, this is still relevant and true. And it's also sometimes the cost of greatness, like what it costs you. And I think it's what we were just talking about in terms of where you put your energy and how do you find balance. So that's really, where we start is why now and what is still relevant. And we're a small company. And so if it speaks to one of us and we can defend it and be like, this is this is, what would interest me. This is what would move me emotionally in seeing this story of this person. That would affect my life now and in moving forward and create conversations inside of the culture, then that's where we start to dig into the story.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. So last question before the lightning round. You're known for being an amazing negotiator, and it's so important for women, for people of color to know and not perfect, but master this skill for themselves. What are some of your tips for someone who wants to improve their own negotiating abilities?
Well, it's interesting because I think it was like a big fear. Like I used to be like, oh my gosh, that agent's calling me. I'm so nervous. Like what, I don't know what to say. Like I just want to say yes. I want everybody to get paid. I want everyone to make what they want. I just want it to go away and it to be done. And so we can get to the good parts. But what I realized is that's not how it works. It's not how it should work. And why I mean that's not how it should work is because this is a business. It comes back to that. So for me, it was about learning more about the business. And we didn't talk about my time inside of Fuse when I was the head of programming. Really small cable network on the edge of when cable is going away and the streamers are killing cable. It was my MBA in kind of the business. Where I really got to learn what, particularly for television, what does all this mean? Ad sales and affiliates and how to, CPMs and how do we make business? And that really helped inform me and understanding why we have to have first and foremost, why we have to have these negotiations and seeing the big picture and the macro. But I'm also I have no poker face. And so my style may not work for everyone, but I think it's about understanding again, where you can go, where the line is, what the budget is, how you want to spend the money, what is going to be best for the project creatively. And then I'm just really honest and I hold my lines. And that's, and then of course there's the passion in there too, when you're actually chasing a piece of material. Yeah. It's know you're creative and be really passionate and be specific and be able to speak to the person as much as you're speaking to the work, whether that's an author or a screenwriter or a director, whoever it may be. I think it's all of that. But for me, because I don't feel like I never worked in an agency, I don't call myself a salesperson, even though all day long as a producer you're selling. And so it's really about just having those objectives in my mind, understanding it from a business perspective, and then being able to use that logic to really have those conversations and have them from a place of integrity, but also strength.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it is, in a way, storytelling, right?
Yeah.
To sell on behalf of anybody, which is what we do as producers, you have to be able to distill all of that into your own story and your own narrative or in your own life experiences and your own lens to be able to bring that and communicate that effectively, passionately to whomever and know your audience, because of the way you speak to an agent and a lawyer is different than how you're going to talk to talent. But that same passion, that same fire has to be in there, and you have to sort of find whatever version that is for yourself.
And know that everybody's going to compromise.
Yeah.
And I feel like early on, I was always willing to yield. Okay, well then we'll take less, or even if I'm running someone's company, or we'll throw out our pilot fee. And it's and also work with good lawyers who can support you, and be the person in front of you. I mean, agents and managers are great, but I've learned so much from having George had a fantastic lawyer. And Courtney and Angela, shout out to Daryl Miller, have a fantastic lawyer. And again, it's just finding that strength and integrity and worth, and just being able to be calm and patient. Because I panic and be what's going to happen? It's going to go away. And you know what? If it goes away, it's not your project. It's more important you get the deal that is going to be best for you and your company, and in order to move forward with that project. And so also sometimes it's even turning to my team and being no, we're not going to move. And 9 out of 10 times, we still get the project.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for taking an hour to share a bit of your journey and your wisdom with me and the listeners. Okay, so here is the lightning round. What is a song that teleports you to a happy place?
Raise Your Glass by Pink, because I think all my friends were getting married when that song was out. And so it was all the guys would leave the dance floor, and it was just ladies' time.
Love it. What is the latest piece of art that has moved you? A book, a show, anything?
I have to say, I've been on the Amelia Perez bandwagon. That's what I saw most recently that moved me. So I'd love to say a book or something else, but I loved that movie. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna
Yeah. Okay.
stand behind it.
Fill in the blank. When I'm overworked, blank helps ease the stress.
Oh, I get my nails done for sure. It's like the one place where I can't be on my phone because they have my hands. And so that ends up being my happy place.
Love it. What's one of the most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And it doesn't have to be financial.
Oh, that one's tough. As hard as it is getting married, that is my best investment, because to have a partner who can, see you wholly for your good and your bad and challenge you and love you through those challenges, like that's a great investment.
Mm, sweet. Okay. Okay. Last question. What is one failure that you wouldn't be here without?
I went through 17 months of unemployment for the first time in my career after I left Fuse. And had I not gone through that, I would not have gone back to running pods. And I do think being a creative producer, not inside of a studio or a streamer, is exactly where I needed to be. And those are my superpowers, like sitting with writers and building projects. And so, as difficult as those 17 months were, and I had not experienced it, and I know lots of folks go through that and are going through that now, and this was in 2017, so I can't blame Contraction, but it really centered me and put me back where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was lovely.
Thank you.
Amazing. Oh, there were so many more questions I didn't get to ask. That's okay,
Oh,
though.
but it's okay. I was like